Hey friends, and welcome back to Checkbox Other. I am so excited for you to get to know Dr. Adia Gooden today. She is a PhD who's a licensed clinical psychologist. She is amazing. We talk about so many things in this episode, but for those of you who listened to this podcast before, we talk a lot about the importance of normalizing therapy and mental health. And so much of that is through the incredible work she does around unconditional self-worth. So if you have been questioning your worth, if you have been struggling with any kind of anxieties or any kind of limiting beliefs about who you are and what you can do, if you are worthy, if you're trying to get that degree or to get that one particular, level of approval from somebody outside of yourself, or you're trying to achieve that thing at work that would make you worthy, this episode is for you because we're here to talk about how you are already inherently worthy in just your existence. I know you might be rolling your eyes, I understand, but I promise you, if you've been feeling any of these achievement, looking for that one gold star to make you feel whole, this particular episode is going to be right up your alley. We talked about so many wonderful things. I am so excited because, as you know, my ability to actually have more transparent conversations around our mental health is so important to me. And I feel like we just blended the importance of therapy and really trauma-informed work as we are doing trauma-informed work on ourselves, as we are interacting with other people, especially right now in the midst of a pandemic that is its own collective trauma. It is so important for us to normalize these conversations. So I am so excited for you to meet Dr. Adia. She gave a TEDx talk on cultivating unconditional self-worth, which she talks about in this episode, and her incredible romantic story around that. My goodness, it broke me. She has over 700,000 views on that TED Talk. Holy crap, that's amazing. She also is the host of the Unconditionally Worthy podcast, and she has a couple of wonderful courses that we talk about in this episode. And don't miss out if you are listening to this and you are loving what she's talking about. Don't worry, at the end, she talks a little bit about a freebie that she offers all of the listeners of this. So if you go to the show notes page, you will see that freebie there. I hope you enjoy this wonderful conversation with Dr. Adia Gooden. Welcome, Dr. Adia Gooden, to Checkbox Other. I am so happy you are here today.
Thank you. I'm really excited and happy to be here with you too.
And just for all of you who are listening to know this, we were just talking about how the internet universe of sorts brought us together in the most kismet way. And so, Adia, I'm so happy you're here. I feel like there is so much stuff that I nerd about on this podcast, whether it be with guests or by myself, and how important the intersection of mental health and just our own ability to have our own relationships with ourselves is so important. And so bringing that together with belonging and really just talking about the way things are right now and how we can get closer to who we are and appreciating that, I think is so important. So thank you.
Yeah.
So many levels.
Yeah.
So the first thing, my first question for everybody is to start with a Cliff Notes version of their journey. Twists, turns, aha moments, what has led you to where you are today. You can start wherever you want and end wherever you want. But I would love to kind of hear a little bit about your journey so the audience gets to know you a little more.
Yeah. I was thinking about this question, especially in the context of this podcast. And I do think that I grew up feeling different, feeling other in a lot of ways. So I am African-American, I identify as Black, cis woman, and I grew up sort of in an upper middle class family and went to private schools. And I was often one of the only Black girls, if not the only Black girl. And I think that in some ways was the start of me feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I wasn't lovable, like I wasn't worthy. I think, I distinctly remember, in 7th and 8th grade when kids sort of start to I have a crush on so-and-so, or we're going to be boyfriend and girlfriend. And all of those things started to happen, being very clear that I wasn't going to be chosen. Right. That I needed to sort of stuff any crushes I had or any interest I had because no one was interested in me. And that was painful. Right. That was hard. And it didn't cause me to reject my Blackness, thankfully, but I definitely felt like I need to be different in order to be loved and accepted, in order to feel worthy. And so that, along with a couple of other things, sort of set me on this path to sort of try to prove that I was worthy. And I did that in a number of different ways. I tried to be the perfect student, and that one I played out for a very long time. And, I tried to be the perfect friend who was always selfless, always giving, never taking, never asking for anything. Right. I just tried to be perfect in so many ways, and really spent years exhausting myself, right, in these pursuits. And, the academic attempt at sort of being worthy and proving my worthiness, I took to the limit, I say. And it really wasn't until I defended my dissertation and walked out of the room having passed my dissertation and started sobbing that I realized that I was trying to use that to make myself feel worthy, and it didn't work. Right. So I had passed my dissertation, right? I had spent all these years in graduate school. I had gone to graduate school right after college and sort of done all of this stuff. And I don't think I was consciously aware that I was trying to use that to make myself feel worthy. But when it didn't work and I felt so upset and crushed, it was like, okay, right? Like in that moment, I didn't realize it, but it was sort of a reckoning. It was this wake up call that I wasn't going to get to a sense of worthiness outside of myself, right? All of these external things, the perfectionism, the relationships, the academic achievements, none of those things were going to give it to me. And that really set me on the path to look inward, to build a healthy relationship with myself, to forgive myself, to really connect to an internal sense of unconditional self-worth, which is, what I focus on helping other people do today.
Oh, well, I love that so much because, right now we are in holiday season. Black Friday just passed us. Capitalism overload is happening right now. And so much of the way that we value things is from what's on paper or what is shown its value. And even more so in school, what was your grade? What were your resume building moments? And that shows your value and your worth. And then if you're trying to, I'm just like feeling the version of you that you just mentioned of walking out and just feeling like, I did everything and I'm still feeling lacking in this right now, that we keep trying to like find the grade to make us feel whole. We keep trying to, get the degree to make us feel whole, to find that one little thing that is the gold star we've been waiting for. And how there's so many people talking about that now. However, we still witness how much we're trying to either buy or achieve our way into that level of wholeness. And so I hope for those of you listening, whether you've done a dissertation or not, acknowledging those moments in your lives when you have been seeking something outside of yourself to feel a level of validation. And then when it's not there, has there been a moment where you have felt like a failure because of it, rather than realizing that maybe it's been set up that this path isn't necessarily the one that's going to lead to fulfillment? So I appreciate that so very much. And so the question we ask, and you already kind of answered one, so if you want to give another, feel free. But if you want to share a time in your life where you have felt other or different, I feel like you've just mentioned like two or three. So if there's any others, it's like my favorite part of this, the storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, so definitely growing up, I think I felt sort of between worlds. So at school, I felt sort of a little different, as a Black girl. I didn't totally feel like I fit in. And then I went to a Black church, and also like in high school was involved in sort of this Black extracurricular community service group. And I definitely sort of felt like I didn't fit there either. So, I remember distinctly forcing myself to listen to and like hip hop because I was like, I have to like, because before I was like listening to alternative and I liked Alanis Morissette and all this stuff. Right. Yeah. And I was like, the conversations that were being had were about, this or that artist. And I couldn't relate. And I remember just being like, you are going to like this. You are going to like, and now like, I, very much like the music, and it's not a force, but I definitely remember feeling like this is a sign that you are different when you're in these Black social spaces, and you need to change that, because, and there's also these dynamics in some Black spaces where you make fun of each other, right? And it's playful and it's loving, but you still get called out. And
Yeah.
so, you know, for me, because I was struggling with feelings of being unworthy, I didn't want to be called out like that. I didn't want to be called out for not knowing the latest song or the latest whatever. I already felt awkward with dancing. And so I was like, you know, how do I try to like fit in and get into this space? And it took me a while. I think it probably wasn't until like college that I just got more comfortable with my particular manifestation and iteration of Blackness, and not feeling like I had to fit it into this mold. But, you know, when you're a preteen or a teenager, like it feels like very make or break if you're like everyone else. And that was another kind of way that I felt different or other.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yep. It's funny, right? Like, I feel like there's like a laughter that comes with it, because I was like, oh yeah, I can relate to that so very much. And also as adults, we're like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make you any more or less who you are, but we are taught that, right? And I just remember, learning all the lyrics of the song, staying up. Yes, all for sure. And then, you know, I've shared this before, but there are moments where it was like, you're not Black enough and you're not white enough, right? If you're in a space where you're modeling what is quote unquote white, whether it's your skin color or not, that you're never being told that you're enough no matter what. So it's kind of like a catch-22 that no one's really going to be set up to be enough the way that we're structured. But when we are so self-involved as we are when we were preteens, it's so difficult to actually be able to see the forest through the trees, because right in front of you, you're like, okay, they're going to see the discomfort I have in myself. There's my body's changing. My thoughts are changing. All these things are happening. And also I'm going to be found out that I am actually not enough of all those things, because the world around me has told me that, but also I don't even know what my body is doing right now. So I don't even know if I belong in here. Yeah. It's fascinating. And you know, it's so funny when people come on here, they're like, oh, well, you know, I don't feel this way, or I don't feel that way, or my category might not be included. I'm like, the whole point of this is that we actually all have this experience one way or another, whether it be about one aspect of our identity or another. There is some part of the way that this world has been set up that we're constantly striving for enoughness and validation outside of ourselves. Yeah. So I look at this. I didn't even mean to bring this right back to this opportunity here, but I know a big part of the work that you do is all about self-worth. And so often on this podcast, when I'm bringing people on, we're talking about topics that are the tip of people's tongues, or people are talking about a lot, but so often they tend to be used and overused, and like kind of I'm thinking about it like a song on the radio, same with that holding, but a song on the radio that's been played so many times that like whether you actually got the words or not, you know what you think the words are, so you're singing them and you lose the meaning, or you know the beat. And so I'm wondering, you know, with this conversation around self-worth, and I think of very specifically, I feel like self-care has kind of gotten that wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, yeah, we know what it means, but we're really just going to throw it around like it's nothing. Can you talk a little bit about, because this is, you know, your area of expertise and where you are really supporting so many people, what is self-worth and how does it kind of play in the context of the culture today? And how do you envision, like, if you were able to be like, wait, let's define this appropriately rather than having it mean a million other things?
Yeah. You know, I appreciate you asking this question. I think of self-worth as being about how we see ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how we show up for ourselves. So really the foundation of self-worth is, what is your relationship with yourself like? Like what, you know, when we look at your thoughts, you know, what are those like? How are you talking to yourself? How are you treating yourself when something goes wrong, when you're having a hard time? How are you responding to yourself or showing up for yourself? And, you know, I think of unconditional self-worth as the belief that you deserve to be alive, to be loved and cared for, and to take up space, right? Just because you're human, right? Not because you've achieved, or even if you've made a horrible mistake or had this failure or something that you experience a lot of shame around, still believing that to be true for you. And I think that I don't know if I think people talk a lot about self-worth. I think self-worth sort of undergirds a lot of the issues and things that people do talk about. And then when they talk about self-worth, it's usually still conditional, right? There's usually still a sense of like, how does this, either like, are you charging your value? Are you asking for what you're worth? Are you, right? Still sort of in this, you mentioned sort of capitalistic frame. What are
Yeah.
you getting? What are
I
you,
just wrote
are people
transactional.
right? Yes.
Right? Yes.
Transactional. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And so I think often it's still focused on how are other people treating you? What are other people doing to and for you? Versus how are you treating yourself, which is the piece that I think is most important and that I focus on.
Right. It's funny. Yeah. I was like scribbling. I'm like, because there is so much of this. Again, when they become, I'm a marketer by education, and it's amazing what you can do with words. It's amazing how words can mean one thing when they really have the opportunity to mean so many things, and how you can mold them. I mean, we've witnessed that, especially in the last, let's say, 6 years in this country, of how words have been used and distorted to mean different things. And that the fact that worth is really something that is, I mean, I think of it as you're saying that, of like the equation to a dollar. Like how is it that I view myself as a commodity when I'm the only one? I'm the only version of myself. You're the only version of yourself. Whoever you are listening right now, you are the version of you here right now. But somehow we've had to commodify ourselves. And by doing that, you then take something that means so much more than the words or the value are able to give them in a transactional manner. And you've just kind of squeezed that kind of beautiful vitality out of it. Oh my goodness. Well, you have a framework that you walk people to, or you have them kind of, I'm assuming the way that I think about the way you were just talking about this is kind of building a different type of relationship with their idea of self-worth. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about, and then also, how you've seen that kind of create transformation?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, I mean, part of the way this work for me came about was my own journey, as I've shared. And also because I'm a clinical psychologist and I work with clients, seeing so many other people struggle with the same thing. So for about 4 years, I was working at a college counseling center at one of the top universities in the country. And so these brilliant, high achieving students were really struggling with a sense of worthiness, right? Like really, really struggling. And I think, again, it sort of pushes up against what society says, which is do all the right things, get into the right schools, get the right jobs, get the whatever, and you'll be happy and you'll feel good about yourself and whatever. And so, but then if you're a therapist, you sort of see the insides and it's like, well, no,
Yeah.
that actually doesn't follow necessarily. And so seeing that and realizing, okay, what has worked for me on my own self-worth journey, what has helped my clients, helped me to sort of come up with practices that really support people in embracing their unconditional self-worth. And so at a higher level, they're sort of looking at, so how do you release the past? Because a lot of times people are struggling with, well, so other people may be worthy unconditionally, but I did this.
Right.
Or this happened to me and that makes me unworthy, right? So, I talk a lot in my programs about self-forgiveness, right? Like how do you release the past, take the wisdom, leave the pain, right? Allowing yourself to be free from this thing that happened. Because my belief, and this is kind of radical and I think hard for some people to wrap their minds around, is really that there is nothing that someone can do that makes them unworthy. There are certainly behavior and actions that are problematic that people need to be held accountable for, whatever. But I don't believe in throwing anyone away. And so, that process of forgiveness says, I may have done something, I may have experienced something, but I'm still worthy. Another big piece is practicing self-compassion, which is showing up for and with yourself, being kind to yourself, letting go of all of the self-criticism, right? Stop beating yourself up, that sort of thing. And then I think, another big piece is sort of trusting yourself, tapping into your intuition, your internal wisdom, so you can figure out what you want for your life, not from this, again, like transactional, what do people want from me? What gives me a approval, what gives me all of those things, but what am I really here to do? And then a piece of that also is like, how do you let in the good, right? Because so many people, especially when they feel unworthy, struggle to let in good things, right? Because it feels like I'm not worthy of it. And so you may have found an amazing, loving partner and you don't let in their love because you feel unworthy of it, right? Or there may be this amazing job opportunity, but you don't apply because you feel unworthy of it and you don't feel good enough. So another piece is like, okay, can you envision it? And then also let it in, like let the good stuff in so life can feel really wonderful because you're worthy of that.
I felt like you were like speaking directly to me right now. And then like past versions of me as you're talking about this. I feel like, I hope there's like, I hope my coach and my therapist are listening. No. But that piece about self-compassion, you know, I remember, because it's a beautiful thing. Compassion for others is something, especially women and especially women of color, have had to cultivate to survive a lot of situations and be able to be a chameleon, to be able to survive situations that weren't built for you to succeed, were made so you are either the problem or the threat one way or another. And so being able to understand and see the goodness and connect with that in another person is something that we're kind of forced to do oftentimes. And when we turn that mirror on ourselves, it's so hard unless you have been fostered, that you have been in an environment that constantly is holding that for you. I mean, I've had people on the podcast before. Andrea was anyway, that we're talking about how there were, you know, family members that were saying like, I understand that the world is telling you this, but let me clear that up for you. If you don't have that voice actively there, it's not being cultivated by the world around you. And so often creating that experience of self-compassion can really be, I mean, when you said that, I have worked so hard on that the past few years, but it is still like this very daunting thing that like the word self-compassion just comes right out of your mouth, but also the weight of it is like, it's a very real thing and it is extremely powerful. And I think the most fascinating part, especially for people who have been historically not represented, or at least systems and structures haven't been made for them. It's a skill, a muscle that you have in, like you can lift hundreds of pounds of that, but to do it for yourself, oftentimes it feels like 2 pounds is 100 pounds. And so being able to kind of translate something that you know very well and you are doing each and every day and turning that lens on yourself can be a scary thing, but it is so important. And, you know, so I felt a little bit seen in a kind of way when you mentioned that. And then I think the whole part about kind of letting in the good, or letting in love and joy and happiness, again, is something I feel so like I'm laughing because I could hear the experiences I've had with my therapist and my coach where they're like, oh, you need to do this. I'm like, yeah, great. Thanks so much. But you know, it's once you start getting to those soft spots that it's like, those things sound really great. But when we're talking about my trauma, we're talking about my past narratives, we're talking about what happened to me yesterday, we're talking about the rejection that happened to me, last week, it's really hard for me to channel all of that compassion and all of that ability to just allow for good stuff to come, because I'm fielding all this bad stuff, whether it's today, yesterday, or when I was a kid. And so it is really, it sounds simple. Yep. And the actual, this is a therapist who's working with like the simplest of things. When they sound really simple, it's the behavior of actually making them real in your life that takes the time and takes the willingness, I think, to really sit with yourself in what can feel really icky and sticky, and can also be that thing that because you can't achieve what seems so simple, then you aren't worth it. And at the same time, it's like, no, you have the potential to get there because you have been worth it from the beginning. So I think that's amazing. I actually have had people on the podcast before that when the beginning part, when you were saying, I believe everyone is worthy, like from being born, you are here. Even when, anyway, I was going to go into like, before you're in the physical form on this earth, but we won't go there. It's so interesting though, because that like you're saying, it's radical. The reaction that I've gotten from so many people and just saying like, it's, you don't need to be anybody other than yourself to be worthy here, is like, it's like you, I don't know, like harming a family member for saying that. You're like, no. And so it's so interesting when we live in a world that's telling us that we have to be a certain way, or we will be held accountable for not doing that by just standing in yourself and your truth and your worth is more than enough. is like
Yeah.
a threat in itself. I'd love to hear your kind of take on this. I've been talking for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think related to the first part of what you were saying, really to self-compassion and sort of the challenge, I think that's why, with my clients and the programs that I have, I'm very practical, right? So because self-compassion in theory, everybody says, yeah, that's great. But then it's like, okay, yeah, what does it look like to practice it? Right. And like, what do you feel in your body and how do you overcome that? And I really like to get very practical and specific so that it goes from this theoretical thing that's just too far off to, oh, this is actually something I can do. And it is a practice. It is something you have to return to again and again and again. And it's possible. It feels like it feels actionable. So that's one thing, which I think is really useful. If people are feeling like, oh yeah, that sounds good in theory, but I have no idea how to get there. It's like, find a therapist, find a program, find a coach, find somebody who can really guide you in the practicals of how to put this into practice in your life. I mean, I think the piece around people just like really pushing back, I think part of it is related to cognitive dissonance, which sort of is psychology speak for somebody is saying something that you don't believe, right? Like if you believe the truth of who you are is that you're unworthy, and somebody says, no, you're worthy, there's a dissonance there because you don't believe it. It makes you feel like that's not true.
Right.
And so sometimes it can feel safer to be in a space of believing that we are unworthy. It can feel more safe and more comfortable, even though it's painful in some ways, to believe that we are unworthy because that is what we have been told. That is what we believe. That's sort of the ground we walk on. And if somebody says, no, but what if you were worthy unconditionally? It's like somebody is like swept the rug out from under you.
Yeah.
It's like, and you're hitting the ground and you're like, what the heck? What the heck? I don't believe that. I can't believe that. All of these things would fall apart in my mind if I believed that. And I think there's also a lot of fear people have that if I believed I was unconditionally worthy, then wouldn't I sit on the couch all day and do nothing in the world? Right? Like, don't I get my edge and my drive from a place of, I got to prove.
Yes.
And, my challenge to people is no, actually, you might stop doing some things that are like grunt work or that you've been doing just to prove to people that you're good enough. But it would open up life in a way for you to share your gifts and strengths in a way that makes you come alive. Right? In a way that helps you to show up and shine fully in the world. It's not going to dull you out. And so that's also a lie that we hear, right? You need to have a chip on your shoulder. You need to be working to prove yourself, right? That's how you get ahead. That's what's going to make you successful versus coming from a space of like, yeah, I'm already worthy. And what do I want to do? How do I want to show up? What do I want to give? What do I want to share?
Yeah. It's so interesting. The kind of trauma piece of it all, the chip on your shoulder has become, again, something that we talk a lot about. Trauma tends to be in the word triggering. Everything has become so normalized that small things now become traumas. Mm-hmm. And for some people they are. So let me not classify other people's traumas, especially not me. That's not where my expertise is. But it's so interesting to think about how now that we are creating a space where there seems to be more conversation around the fact that there are nuances in everyone's experiences and that past traumas, whether they're generational traumas or traumas in your life, can actually shape and create your narrative about yourself and the way that you interact with other people and where you see your worth from a starting point, and then kind of what those hurdles are to actually being able to create space for that worthy version of yourself to take up space and not necessarily be that person sitting on the couch doing nothing. How do you kind of, as you're doing this work around self-worth, how do you talk about or think about it in relation to kind of this serious dynamics around mental health that can stand in your way? Because a lot of, especially as you're saying self-compassion, I keep thinking of it like, how would my dad say, this is really what is coming in my head. He'd be like, well, you're happy, just be happy. That's, be happy and nice to yourself. That's what you're saying, right? Okay, cool. Just go do that. And so how does that interplay happen with regard to, really a lot of that the mental health weight that you're carrying around. It's not just a matter of flipping a switch, as you're saying, the practice of it all. How do you think about the kind of interplay between how we handle our trauma and how we kind of really own our self-worth, and how, what are their relationship to each other?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, a big part of healing from trauma is rewriting the narrative, right? Often when we experience trauma, and yeah, I think you're right to sort of point out that there's sort of a range of traumas that people have. And I do think there are ways in which we're getting a little bit to a place where anything that's challenging becomes a trauma for people. And I think the challenge with that, the problem with that, is that when we overuse it, we dull down what it really means. And so I do think there's a difference between having a very challenging, difficult experience in life and experiencing a trauma. A good friend and colleague of mine who's an expert in treating trauma says that trauma is really when an experience overwhelms your ability to cope with the situation at that given time. And so that is very specific. So anyway, but usually when we experience trauma, what comes along with it, especially if it happened to us as a child, but this certainly can be true if it's happened to us as an adult, is a narrative that maybe we did something to deserve this. And that can come in a lot of different forms, right? Well, if I hadn't done this, if I hadn't gone there, if I hadn't been this way, if I hadn't been in a relationship with that person, if I had, right? But there's a lot of sort of narrative that becomes, I deserve this, or I did something wrong, or it was my fault, or I was weak, I'm a victim, there was nothing I could do, right? So these are the common narratives that emerge from experiencing trauma. And a big part of the healing process that we work on in therapy is rewriting that narrative, right? Is shifting the story from you're a victim, you deserved it, to this happened to you, it wasn't fair, it wasn't just, you did not deserve it. And let's look at all the resources that you called on internally and externally to get out, or to survive, or to overcome, or to, right? And that shifts the narrative, and it's incredibly powerful. I think there are intersections between healing from trauma and going on your self-worth journey. So I mentioned self-compassion. It's a huge tool when healing from trauma. And self-compassion isn't about just being happy. It's really about tuning into yourself and your body, accepting and allowing your emotions, which is another big part of healing from trauma, and responding and showing up to yourself with kindness, and remembering that experiencing something awful doesn't mean that you are the only one or that you're unworthy, right? So this common humanity piece. So it's a huge tool that supports people in healing from trauma and reminds you that you're worthy no matter what you went through, right? Self-forgiveness, again, maybe there was something you possibly could have done differently. That, you know what I mean? In the context, can you forgive yourself for that, right? Can you allow yourself to be human, allow that to be okay? Can you learn and pull wisdom from this experience, right? So these are things that really support people in both healing from trauma and, going on their self-worth journey. I really think that for some people, and sort of generally with the mental health question, not all, but some people, the roots of their anxiety and depression can be self-worth issues, right? Because when you don't feel worthy, you usually don't trust yourself. When you don't trust yourself, it's really likely that you're going to feel anxious in almost everything in life, right? Like, and worry and go, and I can't stop. And what about this, right? Like constant. Or when you feel unworthy, you're likely to be engaging in a lot of self-criticism and also to feel depressed, right? Like that's a symptom of depression, right? To not to feel struggle to take care of yourself, to struggle with your daily needs, right? All of these things are intersecting. And so I'm not saying it's the only cause, because there are other things that lead to these mental health concerns. But I think that in a lot of ways, the practices that help people on their self-worth journey also help people with mental health issues. I was actually just having a conversation with a former course member and for my Unconditionally Worthy program. And she was saying that the biggest shift was that anxiety is no longer running her life, right? That her life was getting very small, very crouched. She was not sleeping. She was thinking she might have to quit her job. And going through the course and doing these practices. And I don't talk specifically about anxiety in the program, but learning to trust herself, forgive herself, accept herself, all of these things shifted to the point where, yeah, she experiences anxiety sometimes, and she's still able to do what she wants to do in her life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think these things are very much related and intersecting.
I love that so much. Because I think there's so much of a pull to try to separate things from one another and to label one thing as part of our journey over here, and that's safe. And so, one of the especially the millennial generation having this therapy generation title to it. And when it came through, I mean, the conversation's been around, but it was in a Wall Street Journal article back like 3 or 4 years ago. And it was kind of made like a joke. And like like every piece of reporting about millennials, it's been to minimize. And I think it is so interesting to really just acknowledge the fact that as we are doing this work, it is contagious across our life. And so, yes, you might be working on something that you're calling self-worth, but it's actually unraveling a knot that is tied to so many different aspects of your life, and honoring the fact that like, it's a beautiful thing that we have the ability to heal in one place. And it's amazing how it can map across many places. And we don't necessarily see the common thread there. It's funny. I was in Portugal the last few weeks, and I was very intentional in my time there to not be touristing, to like actually be living in a different place, and to be like sitting in a new environment, to be in a different world, to be in a place where I could just think about, it was just for me, myself, and I. That might sound very selfish. So yes, selfish is a good thing.
Doesn't sound selfish.
And one of the things that was so interesting is that I was staying at my cousin's place, and her husband were amazing. They weren't there, so I was alone. But they were constantly telling me things to go and do, right? Because that's how we've been taught about like going to a new place. In order to do it well, you have to consume. You have to go and see it, take pictures. If it's not on Insta, it's not real. All of that. And it was so interesting because after I had been there for a while, we had a conversation. And one of the things that he had said to me was, what if the one thing that you will fall in love with about Portugal is the place that you're not going to right now? And it was amazing because I have lived my life, my corporate life, that was about FOMO, that was about trying to achieve and get that next thing and make sure I got, make sure the external validations and the receipts were in my back pocket if I needed them. And it was amazing because I didn't even realize it until I was already in the middle of my response, where I said to him, I was like, I actually don't live my life like that anymore. I believe that the things that I'm supposed to experience, I will. I don't have to be any different version of myself for them to come into my world. And it was really interesting because I said to him, I was like, living my life with anxiety means that even if I achieve those things, I'm not present in that moment. So even if I go and see that, I'm not with it because I'm looking for the next thing and I'm looking for the next thing. And it's so fascinating because so often as we're doing this work, this is, again, decades of therapy that got me the ability to say that and then be like, oh crap, that just came out of my mouth. It's amazing how that's something that's like vacation planning, but really has roots in something so much more important, and also has roots in something that has been so curated by, in the past, curated by really being viable and valid externally to other people. And when we're able to honor our own journey and create that space to say, you might not understand where I'm coming from here, but that's okay. I understand where I'm coming from. And yes, and it was funny, because I had to kind of make a joke about it. I said, I don't know about you, but like what I'm viewing here, Portugal's not going anywhere. But if it is, let me know because I'll come back faster. But like I will come back and see the things I'm meant to see if I was meant to see them. And I trust that. And it was funny because I knew so much of that urge and that they wanted me to have a great time in the place that they loved. And it was so interesting to experience the fact that I had like the best time. I love Portugal, right? But my way of loving Portugal might be different from anybody else's way of doing that. And so often we don't actually allow ourselves, oh my goodness, I'm going to the last part of what you mentioned, the part to like actually absorb the joy and the good and the wonderful, if it's not something that somebody else already put value to. So it was really fascinating.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the key, is you doing what you wanted, right? You tuning in to, how is this time in Portugal going to feel best for me, not for my cousin and his partner, not for, you know, Instagram and the followers, but for me. And that's really where when you're out of the space of, I need to prove that I'm worthy, that's when you can tune into that and then make decisions aligned with that. Because for some people, they may love the, like, I'm going to see this and see, and that's okay. Right. And it's more about, can you tune in enough to figure out what it is you want and what you need, and then go with that and not feel so pulled by, well, are people going to know that I was in Portugal if I don't post something every day? Or am I going to, you know, I feel sort of guilty because my cousin let me use this place and then I'm not doing the things they want. And so then they're going to think I'm a bad cousin because, you know, it's like we could get caught up in all of that and then you miss the opportunity. But I think it's so powerful that you said, I'm going to do this how I want to do this, and in a way that feels nourishing and restorative to me, and that I trust that I will see the things I'm supposed to see and meet the people I'm supposed to meet. And I'm going to just go with it with this ease. I think that's so beautiful.
Thank you for saying that. I will tell you that for those of you that are listening that are like, yeah, great. So again, that same, like, well, if you sit on the couch, nothing's going to happen. I will tell you, I had these moments where like there were people knocking on the door. Like I had at one point the police come to the door and I didn't speak Portuguese, they didn't speak English. And I was like, nope, whatever is going to come to me, it had nothing to do, you know, I had to let them in. And I was like trying to figure out how we might be able to communicate with each other. I was like, no, you're showing me that whatever is meant to come here into my life is going to find its way one way or another, whether I'm sitting here or whether I'm out in the world. And so I always I try to find those examples for myself let me not act like, oh, I said that and everything was great. I woke up in the morning being like, I should go here and I should do that and I should do that. Like it's all very internalized, even though it takes a lot of practice to be able to say that out loud. And I was surprised midway through it that it happened. It doesn't mean that magically all of a sudden those voices aren't there and that like you need to do all of this in order to make the most of this. That is what we grow. I mean, if you're growing up in America, that is what you grow up to believe, that you need to strive for the American dream. And the American dream is to have it better than what was here before you and to make something out of nothing. And so if you're not constantly trying to make something out of nothing, then what are you here for?
Yeah. And the American dream is also more stuff, more, right? And do, right?
Yes.
Very little of it is be, experience, allow, right? Like these sort of ease words.
Yes.
It's accumulate and, and how many of this do you have? And how many places have you been? And how many blah, 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 blah. And so it is countercultural to say, I'm going to allow, I'm going to be curious. Let's see what happens.
Yes.
And to not be in that mode of doing and getting more and more and more.
Oh, it's so funny. The human being versus the human doing is something that I feel like it's so funny that you just said that, because I had that conversation there's a couple of books that I've read that have this whole piece. There's a book called Burnout that talks about the fact that we have like a human giving syndrome. Have you heard of that book before?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it, but I've heard of it and listened to like podcasts on it. And that sort of thing.
I love the Nagoski sisters. I think they're wonderful. And I also listened to the book, which makes you, when you listen to an audiobook, you're like, oh, we've been hanging out. No, we haven't. So, but those of you that are listening to this podcast, yes, we have been hanging out for sure. But it is, it's so fascinating that we've been taught about the word human beings, but we have not been encouraged to exist. We've been encouraged to plan ahead. We've been encouraged to show instead of to be and breathe. And, this is where I think I think of myself 6 years ago and like meditation. Oh yeah. Okay. That's great. I have time for that. But being able to sit and breathe and witness yourself, it is one of the most powerful things that's ever happened. And I also am like, yes, 6 years ago, me, come here. I understand. You're not going to see this right now. You don't have to. I'm not going to convince you. But the ability to just witness life happening and witness again, this is like coming back to the end part that you were talking about allowing the good to come to you. If you are constantly planning and hedging, you're not going to see the good. And if you are inclined to notice the bad and how to improve, then there's absolutely no way that you see the good, because your radar, your kind of hypervigilance is to pay attention where there's a flaw and where there's a break, not where things are smooth, not where things are good, not where things are expansive. Oh, so, okay. I have so many things. I want to talk to you forever because I'm like, I have 5,000 more things I want to talk about. Okay. So one of the pieces, so one of the things that I tend to refer to a lot when I'm working with clients around career, for sure, around limiting beliefs with regard to identity and our relationship with where we want to go in our path forward. Oftentimes, though, I like to use metaphor. I've probably done it 7,000 times in this episode. But one of the ones that I tend to use a lot is around dating and our intimate relationships, because I do feel like in all of the things we consume, it tends to be the way that we process our existence in this world, through our ability to be in close relationship with others. And especially if you're a woman in this country, and whether or not you are actually attracted to men, the idea is that the penultimate that you can do is be in a relationship. And so I know that in the work that you do, you have a program called Date Yourself. And so I would love to hear a little bit about kind of where, how you think about how we build these wonderful, or we're conditioned to believe that building these wonderfully healthy, strong, loyal, forever, repopulate our nation type of relationships is there. And then how, as you're turning that back on ourselves, how do you think about when people say, in order for somebody to love you, you have to love yourself first? So kind of, I hope that didn't go too far, but like, how do you view these things together as you're talking about the importance of your relationship with yourself?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think that, people are very interested in romantic relationships. Yeah. And I think part of that is because in the US, like contemporary US society, a romantic partnership has been put forward as the place where you will be unconditionally loved and accepted, right? And you'll be chosen, right? To be chosen. I think especially for women, right? Are you going to be chosen? And does that, and are you worthy, right? And if you're chosen, that means you're worthy. So there's both sort of a longing for a person that will love you unconditionally in a way that maybe your parents weren't able to, and you didn't get other places. And I also think there's a sense of, I'm being chosen, and that means that I'm worthy, right? As sort of this ultimate thing for women in particular. Yeah. So I think both of those things, right, like make relationships such a kind of hot topic. And I, similar to you, I love using metaphors. And part of the reason that I, created the Date Yourself program is because I wanted people to focus on their relationships with themselves, right? I think we do a lot of waiting for the right person to find us. And I think often with women, it's framed as sort of, you have to wait to be chosen. You have to wait to be found. You have to wait to be asked out. You have to wait to be, right? Especially in a hetero, normative framework, right? So, it's like, okay, what if you could give these things to yourself, right? And could we think about what does it look like to date yourself, to look at your relationship with yourself, to look at how you're treating yourself, how you're talking to yourself, how you're, taking care of yourself or not taking care of yourself. And what does that look like as a framework for building a healthy relationship with yourself? Because I think that, having a healthy relationship with yourself is really the foundation for having a healthy life. And this sort of relates to the other part of your question. Like, no, I don't know if no one will ever love you, or like you can never be loved by anyone else if you don't love yourself. And I don't totally agree with that. I think that really what I would say in a more nuanced way is that it's very difficult to let in the love of others if you don't love yourself, right? And that's sort of going back to the letting in the good. I think for myself and my personal experience of dating and struggling with dating for many, many years and having lots of dating anxiety, and what I've seen with other people is that, and even in couples therapy that I've done, right, is that one partner, if they're struggling with self-worth issues, if they don't feel worthy, if they don't feel lovable, it almost doesn't matter what the other person does or says. It's not going to sink in totally. And it creates this tension and issue in the relationship because of that. And so I think it's similar to, you know, what we were talking about earlier. It's like confronting people with this truth that they might be unconditionally worthy. If you do not believe it, we don't really let in things that we don't believe. Usually if something is counter to our beliefs about ourselves, we're going to reject it. And so it is very difficult to be in a mutually loving, you know, relationship when you do not love yourself. I don't think it's impossible. And I also think there are some relationships that are so powerful that they pull you out of a space of unworthiness or a space of I'm not lovable, and show you how to love yourself, right? So I think that is possible. But I also think that if you're searching for love or you want love, one of the best things that you can do is to learn to love yourself, or to learn to treat yourself well. And that's going to set you up so much more than waiting and longing and changing your hairstyle.
Right. And changing yourself.
It's fun to change your hair, but definitely not changing yourself.
Right. Yeah.
It's not a great approach.
Please don't. Yeah, please don't. It's so funny. The way that you started that was about the being chosen, and kind of it harkens back to when you were talking about the kind of Cliff Notes version, where you were talking about, you know, being younger and being like, okay, so I'm not going to be the person that's chosen in this environment. And it's funny. I did a talk, I guess it was earlier this year, talking about like times in my life where, you know, racism was very, very, very present. And many of those times were in romantic relationships, actually, very young, middle school, and, you know, and then not so very young. And so it's so interesting to think about the fact that that part of us, that kind of person that wants to be picked, that person that wants to be chosen, that child that has a crush, but that person also that wants to be picked in like kickball, you know, that level of our relationship with rejection and our kind of fear of rejection can make it so it's difficult for us to actually occupy and hold space for who we are and what we need and what we want. If our focus is really, I want to be choosable, instead of it being, I want to be as much of myself in the space, of the people that can actually honor and hold space for that unconditional worth that I am owning, can see that and be like, okay, that's the person. Yes, I chose them, but they chose them too. And so it's really, I feel like the full circle piece of this is really that ability to choose yourself and allow yourself to kind of shine in a way that the person that actually holds enough space for your relationship to allow you to exist has the ability to kind of see that and also welcome that into their world. And I think that that's so fascinating, especially as we think about the couples therapy piece of it all. I think of Esther Perel, who talks a lot about, you know, this belief, especially in current modern relationships, that we have one person that is everything for is our best friend, is our confidant, is the therapist we go to, and is also the teacher that we have, and is our intimate lover for sure, can blow our minds physically and emotionally, and brings everything we need. And like this idea that we have this one magic bullet that solves every problem that we'd ever have, and that is through romance. It's so interesting that we show up looking for that without showing up in the space where that person, even if they exist, can see who we are. I think that's
I totally agree, right? Like usually when I was anxious about and I was dating, it was, are you going to choose me? 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 Right. And, you know, I think a big practice, you know, this is where self-compassion can be practiced, which is connect to the little one in you, the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old who's like, well, what if we don't get chosen? And what if, you know, and freaking out, and give her a hug and sit her down next to you and say, it's okay. Like, I'm here. We're okay now.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we've been chosen. We are chosen. We're good. Right. And you comfort her, and you're also comforting yourself. And then you remember, I'm also choosing in this dating experience, which is huge, right? To go
Very
in
important.
and say, do I like this person? Do I like how I feel when I'm with them? Am I interested? Like, all of those things, and it shifts your energy. And you're right. Then you're going to be attracted to and attract people who are excited about all of who you are. I think so. I just got married this summer.
Nice.
And I met my now husband sort of just before I was giving my TEDx talk, which is on cultivating unconditional self-worth. And it was like a month before. Our first date was a month before. And I remember at that date, I like told him, I was like, oh yeah, like I'm going to give a TEDx talk in a month, blah, blah, blah. And he like got tickets. Like, first of all, it was sold out. He figured out how to get, and this is without me asking him. Like, he got tickets, figured out how to get tickets. He's a teacher. He never takes time off work. He took the day off so he could drive me to the talk, like came, sat through all the TEDx talks, took me out to dinner. Like, and it was just like, this is what it looks like for someone to be like, I am so excited for you to shine in the world, and I'm here to support you. And not to be like, well, I'm going to give a TED talk one day and like, this is cool, but but just to like totally show up and like support it. And that's what can happen when you're in a space of like, I know I'm worthy, and not like I'm like a TEDx speaker, blah, blah, blah. But like, it allows you to attract the people who are excited about your full energy and your full shine.
Yes. It's so fun. First of all, we were talking about like, why do we have intimate relationships and romantic relationships? I am covered in like the emotional experience I just had from you telling that story. That's why so often we harken back to these kind of metaphors, because they are so powerful that we can feel. Again, some of it is because of how we are programmed as human beings, but a lot of it is what we see and consume is what makes us worthy, for sure. And it's interesting because I feel like I've actually been having a difficult time with that exact experience of like really stepping into that space of saying, here's who I am and here's what I do. And especially since I've decided to kind of detach from what I call the human efficiency machine, which was me being in private equity and management consulting world and like doing all the right things to be successful, and to do something that really makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And oftentimes when I meet guys, I don't talk about my job, or I try not to talk about my job up front, because it is something that has a tendency to either put me in a position of caretaker, or has a tendency to have that kind of that, I don't know, visceral is a little too far, but that reaction of, yeah, I'm going to TED talk one day, or, oh yeah, great. Well, and I even I had a friend in response to my first TED talk, her response to it. And I was like, so excited. I had like found out about it the night before. I went on a trip with a couple of my friends, and I was like, I held on this so we could all cheers together. And her reaction was, oh yeah, I did a TED talk yesterday. I like spoke in front of 10 people at work. And I was like, oh. And so it's interesting because that type of reaction, when you have that type of relationship in your life that doesn't make room and make space for the celebrations and the joy and all of the good stuff, that doesn't create space for expansion, it can be really difficult to actually own and honor that space for yourself, not even bringing the other people into the mix. And so hearing the fact that this guy, after a month, I mean, your husband, I shouldn't call this guy.
But back then he was, at first he was this guy. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. That is like, okay, yes, I will make room and I will make space, and I'm comfortable enough in who I am to know what my capacity is to create room and space for another person as themselves, and not trying to change who they are. And it is something that's, I just wish that was more of the romantic comedy movies, that we actually had more of these kind of real, maybe it's the older I'm getting that I want that, but I wish as we were younger, it was that. It wasn't like, oh, I, had to lose my voice for a Disney prince to save me, or I have to, fall asleep for you to kiss me and save. Like, there's not this savior dynamic. It's literally like, we think of how many incredibly strong, independent women there are out there that have been kind of fed this Disney way of life that means that you have to shrink yourself to be lovable. it is this, again, it brings it all the way back to, if that is what makes me a viable person, then I need to bring myself smaller to be worthy. And then in that whole process, I'm losing my relationship with any level of self-worth.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah. And the relationship isn't going to work in the long
yeah,
run.
right. Yes.
Because eventually you get tired of crouching and bending yourself into a pretzel, and your muscles are going to ache, and you're going to be like, I got to be my full self. Right. Eventually
yes.
you'll get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I feel like there's so many. I now want to talk to you for a million years. So sorry, that's going to happen offline.
We could do it again.
Yes. So, okay. Is there anything else that you feel like, especially as we're heading into the holiday season, I feel like there is a lot of this relationship with self and relationship with others, whether it is something that you do every day or kind of forced into being in familial situations, whether that be biological family or chosen family, that you really hope, especially with regard to our lens on self-worth, people can kind of take into these experiences and these spaces where sometimes like you're sleeping in your twin bed or the equivalent of whatever that is in your experience of having to step into these spaces.
Yeah. I mean, I think just at first acknowledging that so many of us tend to sort of be drawn back, right, into our younger selves, especially if you're going to your childhood home and all your family is there. And suddenly you're like, why am I acting like a teenager? Like, what's happening? And just to, I think, observe it with a little bit of humor. And then I think that's my other sort of recommendation, is to really observe, right? Like, one of the pieces of self-compassion is mindfulness, right? And that is about like noticing without judgment. And I think that there can be so much utility to just being like, that's interesting. That's an interesting dynamic. Right? Like, I had someone, I was just with my parents, and we were doing something, and my dad, it's like my dad decided, and I'm just like, and for me, I'm like, oh, that relates to this experience when I was a kid. And I just sort of like, and I'm not like, oh, he's awful, because my dad's great in so many ways, but I'm just like, interesting, right? This sort of curious scientist observer, like, I have never been in this space before. What is this like? And it's a curiosity that I think helps to not detach so that you're not connecting to your family, but so that you're not caught up in it. And I think especially if you have a challenging family dynamic, having a like, this is interesting that we're going down this road that we know is going to lead to an argument. Right. And not like, so-and-so always should have done this, not getting there, but just the curiosity. And then if you want to take it a step further, like, what do I need in this moment? Right? Like, I'm getting irritable. I'm getting frustrated. I'm feeling sad. Okay, I need to eat. I've been in the kitchen for hours, or I need to, I cannot do another conversation, and I need to leave the house and take a walk. Like, I'm going to go in the bathroom. I'm going to take an extra long shower, like, what is it that curiosity about what the dynamics are, and then about what you need. And then could you do that? Could you say, I'm going to get up a little earlier tomorrow and go for a walk by myself, so I just have a space to breathe, because I love my family, but all of this is just too much for me. And I usually live alone. And so this is overstimulation. And then just honor it, not just, well, what's wrong with you? You never see your family. And so why do you want to, no, I'm needing some room to breathe. I'm needing a little, can I give that to myself? Yes. So having that sort of relationship with your experience, I think, could be really useful.
I love it. It's so funny. When I work with clients, I'm always like, just think of all of these things as data points. That's all you got to do. Like, allow yourself to be the scientist for a minute, because what happens is the more data points you have, the more you can see the trends, and that actually you can make active decisions in alignment with your values of what you want to do in these situations. And they might happen at home, but they likely happen in all the other dynamics too. They tend to model themselves across the board. And so, yeah, I love that so much. So curiosity, a little bit of patience, and that compassion just snuck right back in there. You didn't use the word, but that's all I heard all the way through that.
I like to sneak it in.
Well, thank you. I am so like, see, I'm not going to get as emotional as I did when you were talking about your husband coming to your TED Talk, but I'm getting there. Thank you so much for joining today. And for those of you listening, we will have all of the socials. And so I really hope you get to know everything that's going on, because I feel like you're changing the game. Really, I feel like this is part of what I think is so important. I talk a lot about therapy, but I think that bringing therapy into the current day and having it be something that we can tangibly do something with and not be like the little black box that no one knows what's inside of it. I think it is really, really powerful. So I'm so grateful for you taking the time. I'm so grateful for you reaching out, truly, because I feel like this was meant to happen. I know I said that already, but for real. And I'm just excited for everyone that just got to listen to this and got to know you a little bit more. So thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Nikki. It's been a pleasure. It's wonderful to talk with you, talk with somebody else who thinks along similar lines. So that's been great. And I'll just say, I have a free ebook on 4 practices to connect to your self-worth. So to your unconditional self-worth. So I'll share that link with you. And if you want to add it to the show notes, and that's a great place to get started. If people are kind of like, I'm interested in seeing more about this, that's something people could sign up to receive.
Yeah. So that will be in the show notes, everybody. It's going to be, if you go to nikkianiston.com/podcast, you will see all of the information on the show notes page. Oh my God, I'm excited. I'm excited for this free ebook. Like, hey, everybody, this is your holiday present from me.
Love it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful conversation. I am so lucky that she kind of knocked on my virtual door to join for this podcast. And I'm so excited that you got a chance to meet her as well. Adia has so many incredible resources for you. So definitely check out her information, but for sure, check out that free ebook that she talked about. If you go to nikkianiston.com/podcast and you look for her name, Dr. Adia Gooden, you will see that free ebook in the show notes page. Okay, my friends, I can't wait to see you on the next episode.